as a reaffirmation of vows. A vaccination against hysteria. We've always known which of you betrayed us. Correct them. Show us you still want to get better. Together.
3 months ago, on March 24th, a new season of the Outlast Trials titled Project Judice was released. As a very big fan of this game, I was insanely excited. This was my first time experiencing a full-fledged season update as I started playing the game in the latter half of Project Messiah. Much like with any game I get into, I've spent all my time pondering the lore and coming up with theories instead of actually doing anything productive. This season, so many exciting things have been released, like the supposed second escape and a brand new trial environment for the Crest twins. A bunch of new lore and a few new MK challenges have also been released. With Season 7 fast approaching, I figured now would be as good a time as any to get out all the thoughts I had about Project Judice. For a majority of players, or at least for myself, the part that I was waiting for the most this season was the teased return of Amelia. In the trailer, they showed the Prime assets finding and reacting to the A graffiti scattered around the trial environments. I saw a lot of people initially have mixed feelings on what this could mean for Amelia. Most assumed the graffiti was faked, as Amelia is currently restrained to a hospital bed in a catatonic state. Others were hopeful that some way, somehow, she managed to get herself up and moving again. Personally, I was more skeptical and figured if there was any chance at another escape, it would most likely be organized by her followers rather than Amelia herself. Regardless, most theories ended up being untrue as it was revealed that the escape was faked and was planted by Markov, more specifically Dr. Easterman. The reactions to Escape the Lies have been largely about the same, with most people questioning what exactly Easterman was thinking with this trial. If the trial was meant to be a sort of way for the reagents to forget about Amelia, then it was certainly failing. Most people thought it to be better if Easterman just buried the idea of Amelia instead of bringing her back through a fake escape. Initially, I agreed with this statement as bringing Amelia back to the reagents' minds would just reintroduce, or newly introduce if someone has just entered Semiala, the idea of a savior to them and potentially give them the desire to leave. Though, after thinking on it some more and doing some more research, I came to a bit of a different conclusion. We've known since the Invasion trailer came out in Season 4 that Easterman is desperate to eradicate the influence Amelia had on reagents. These same feelings are shown again in his private journals that were released this season. If we go back to the Invasion trailer when Easterman is speaking to Amelia, he mentions refraining from taking her life as that wouldn't change anything about what has happened. Killing a person does not mean you kill their ideas. Instead, he seeks to directly kill the idea she gave reagents, the promise of freedom. This is spoken about in his diary entry, A Lovely False Messiah. He mentions that, after Amelia was taken out of the picture, the reagents turned to Lilia as their messiah instead. Dr. Wernicke has expressed his concern over this, as he believes Lilia to be creating a collective unconscious among the reagents. This collective unconscious may result in an uprising that could lead to an escape. To avoid having this happen a second time, Easterman has designed the revision therapy to quell any new or lingering ideas of freedom. But how does Escape the Lies actually go about achieving that? This new trial sets out to taint the idea of Amelia. It is placed in the biohazard facility like the original escape, but instead the exit is sealed off by a fake sky. By doing this, it plants the idea in reagents' heads that the promised escape was nothing more than a farce, and they should not trust anyone who tries to grant them quote-unquote freedom. Throughout the trial, we are given multiple voice lines from Easterman. He describes it as a vaccination against hysteria, further supporting the claim that the revision therapy will make reagents want to stay. He intentionally describes it as a medicine, something to help everyone get better, in the hopes that it will convince them to listen to him. He also makes multiple comments about Amelia being a false prophet, even at one point empathizing with the reagents and saying there's no cruelty like false hope. Longtime reagents who were aware of Amelia's influence but never tried to escape may begin to have second thoughts on what she truly wanted and what actually happened to those who took the chance to flee. This may lead them to being further manipulated by Murkoff and force them to fully embrace the fact that there is no one else they should trust. After all, you can't escape if you're already free, and remember, obedience facilitates autonomy, and who else is there to obey besides Murkoff? Anyways, back to what I was talking about. Quick interruption, actually. While I was messing around in TrialMaker, I happened to hover over Escape the Lies, and the description piqued my interest. It describes the concept of escape as always being a fabrication propagated by particularly stubborn patients who are more resistant to the therapy. I'm not entirely sure what Easterman is trying to imply by describing it like this. When referring to particularly stubborn patients, is he talking about Amelia? Because with the way he worded this, it sounds like he's separating Amelia from the people spreading the idea of escape. Maybe he means Amelia was the one who initiated the conversation around escape even though she never had a solid plan for it, and certain patients who resisted the therapy took the idea and ran with it. Because of this, she may have cracked under pressure and not been able to properly plan the escape route, which ultimately led to the deaths of many reagents. In the end, both Amelia and the reagents ended up propagating a lie, therefore neither should have been trusted. Based on the points I mentioned earlier about Easterman wanting to tarnish Amelia's image, I'm going to assume this is what he's trying to get at. Anyway, now back to what I was talking about. Another reason this trial may exist the way it does is, rather than to taint Amelia's influence, it exists to rewrite her influence. The escape is now a permanent MK challenge, so you can play it as many times as you like. When it's implemented into the therapy like this, it starts to feel much similar to any other trial. Eventually, you begin to move through the objectives without even really considering or caring for much of what's going on. You aren't entirely paying attention to the plotline that is being presented. To new reagents, this trial exists as just that, a plotline. Amelia will not exist in their minds as her own person, but rather as another character in a story. She will become someone that holds the same amount of weight to other characters in the trials, like the Snitch, for example, because her story will stop being something that actually happened and instead will exist as another fabricated scenario that was designed to teach a lesson. Easterman is destroying her influence by making it seem like it never existed to begin with. The idea of Amelia Collier was actually written by Markov as a part of the therapy and nothing more. Though, of course, there aren't only two sides to consider. The effect Escape the Lies has on each reagent isn't ever going to be the same. Depending on how much they know and how much they've internalized the therapy, their reactions will largely vary, meaning this plan isn't foolproof. There isn't an absolutely 100% chance that every single reagent is going to internalize the ideas Easterman is trying to drill into their brains. There is definitely potential for this trial to resonate with reagents and spark a new rebellion. Many players have said that the new revision therapy has actually made them feel closer to Amelia more than anything. I don't doubt something similar hasn't or won't happen in the game. As mentioned before with the collective unconscious that Wernicke was suspicious of, there's been theories that Lilia is going to take advantage of the reagent's desperation for a messiah and have them start a rebellion in her name. This is further detailed in her poem titled Babylon, in which she equates the Signala factory to the city of Babylon, which was doomed to fall. Happy Art here on YouTube does a great analysis of this poem. I would definitely recommend checking out their video. Regardless, with the way the story is being set up, something is surely to be coming soon. I mean, things, and by things I mean Easterman, are getting way out of control, as mentioned by Avallanos in the Project Judice trailer. I can imagine security probably isn't tight enough anymore to keep everybody in check, so the likelihood of a rebellion or betrayal happening is very high. Whether it be by the Prime assets, or Amelia's followers, or maybe even one of the Markov higher-ups, we still aren't sure. Whether or not the uprising will even be successful, we also still aren't sure of, as it is dependent on how well the revision therapy works. As of right now, the only thing we know for sure is that Easterman is desperate to keep the idea of escaping out of reagents' minds and have them willing and ready to silence every idol they come across. Speaking of which, I personally found it very interesting that they added Silence the Idol and Escape the Lies in the same update. To me, they share a very similar concept in the sense that they both pertain to the idea of shutting out the words of someone who is considered to be a savior figure. The way this applies to Amelia, I feel, is pretty obvious. She is the idol and Escape the Lies is Markov's way of silencing her. Silence the Idol goes about its messaging in a bit of a different way. It focuses on politics as its main topic. It follows Bob Veneer, who is played by Eric, taking his chances in the political world. Typically, people who run in any sort of politics are considered to be a savior or a chance at true freedom by society. Bob is going on TV to promote his campaign and spread hope, which is deemed to be false by Markov. As the trials are meant to act as lessons to the reagents, it seems like Easterman is going the extra mile to taint any idea of autonomy offered by an external source. He's further pushing the idea that people are not what they seem and their words can be laced with falsehoods. Therefore, to avoid any future inconveniences, you are best to crush the face of false charisma before there's a chance for false hope to be spread. Based on what the documents read about, it seems as if this face of false charisma was actually inspired by John F. Kennedy. In TV Puppets 1, it is mentioned that Avallanos had seen JFK but stated that he's much more reserved and awkward behind the curtains compared to when he's on TV. Then, how is he able to garner such a following if he's really not all that confident? Easterman deduces the reason to be the fact that television is making quote-unquote interactions feel more personal. He mentions that Kennedy seems as if he is looking into the viewer's soul and talking to them specifically. He wants to help you. Yes, you. In reality, though, JFK is only staring at himself through the camera's lens. He's not looking at anybody at all. The interpersonal feeling is entirely fabricated. In reality, he's actually a very hollow person, but that doesn't get anyone anywhere in the political world, so he needs to be charismatic. There are people pulling the strings behind the camera, picking and choosing exactly what he says and how he says it to make him seem more likable. The more charisma someone seems to possess, the more likely people are to gravitate towards, or in this case, side with them. It helps make their campaign more convincing, meaning it is easier for them to get away with spreading lies. This same idea is also spoken about by the Crest twins in the Project Judice trailer. Aurora notes how a person with a blank, empty look will be the face of power in the age of media, more specifically television. She's echoing very similar remarks Easterman made about JFK. Despite having an outwardly confident and determined appearance, people who run in these positions are actually very hollow, and majority of the time, their charisma is only to keep people distracted from any sort of outrage. It's all a test to see how much power one person can gain before the people will wake up and realize they're being manipulated. Majority of the time, though, they won't. As long as they keep consuming the propaganda spread by politicians on TV, they won't ever have to come face to face with reality. With this context in mind, I personally believe Bob Veneer and Eric to be representatives of this whole idea of TV manipulation. Bob Veneer is presented to us as an outgoing type of person, person, coming to the television studio to have fun on different sets and then promote his political campaign. He's very well liked by people, as heard through the mannequin dialogue at the entrance of the studio. However, the man who plays Bob, Eric, is the complete and total opposite. He's meant to represent the true, in-person version of Bob. Eric is very nervous, constantly trying to convince 3 agents to leave him alone and just let him go home. He repeats time and time again that he is nothing and they should just let him be nothing. He is not important enough to pay this much attention to or air on TV. He also doesn't seem like he's had a very good social life, as seen through his dialogue lines like "nobody's ever paid this much attention to me" or "nobody ever called me beautiful." Additionally, based on this dialogue, it seems as if he struggles with some sort of mental disability. We are not given the specifics of it, only that the doctors at Murkoff diagnosed him as an imbecile, therefore deeming him useless. Again, Murkoff is pushing the idea that the people behind the screen are not what they claim to be. In reality, the people trying to convince you of these big, grandiose things do not actually have the capability to give you these things on their own. I believe the idea of TV manipulation being the main factor in a person's likability to also be another dig at Amelia. She spreads her ideas through TV appearances or messages on the radio and occasionally through graffiti, but never really in person. Of course, you were able to see her in the off-limits areas of the maps during Season 2, but she doesn't speak directly to the player. The only interaction she ever really has is making sure the reagents are quiet so she doesn't get caught. This can be interpreted as her being fearful, therefore she can be seen as not being nearly as confident in person as she is on TV. The only reason she was so sure of herself was because she was able to sit behind a screen and read off a script. The overarching idea here is that, with enough charisma, absolutely anybody can sit behind a screen, read off a script, and feed you lies for as long as you are willing to listen. Anyway, enough about Amelia. Let's spend some time talking about Eric, the new fan favorite. Maybe it's just recency bias, but I have seen more fan content of Eric than I have for any other victim in the game. He seems to be pretty well received by the fan base, as practically everyone I've come across has only had nice things to say about him. People find him very endearing and feel very bad for him, myself included. A lot of people have said they've never felt more awful about killing a victim in the entire game than they have about Eric. His dialogue reveals a lot about who he is, and this includes the many, many tragedies he's had to endure. The most prominent one being his struggle with disability, which is a pretty big point of discussion around his character, though that's not the only thing he's dealt with. During his time as the idol, he makes multiple remarks about Aurora and begs her to stay away from him. A lot of people believe she may have forced herself onto him because he says "don't let her touch me again," amongst other lines. Unfortunately for Eric though, the twins are the only ones he can rely on to save him, as he is heard calling out for them multiple times throughout the trial. He also calls out for Dr. Eastman, saying that he'll be good and he can be his how high if he just gives him another chance. One dialogue that I find particularly chilling is the line where Eric questions why he didn't just end his own life when he still had the chance. Whether or not this line is implying he always struggled with suicidal ideation or is only having these thoughts now, it really goes to show just how much he suffered. The system has failed him so gravely, he wishes he had just given up instead of continuing on trying. Though a lot of these dialogue lines are very missable, I myself didn't even know about them until researching for this video. Because of this, a majority of players seem to feel bad for him purely because of his implied disability, as it's one of the most commonly heard voice lines. Other players have said it's a bit silly for people to pity him only purely because of his disability. It's implied he was a reagent before becoming the idol, so he may have partaken in torturing others himself. Therefore, he's not any more morally sound than any of the other victims. I can understand both perspectives. On one hand, most people who feel bad for him because of his disability may struggle with disability themselves and understand how difficult it is to survive in a system that is built to work against them. I mean, even in 2026, some places and people still struggle to accept, let alone accommodate, people with disabilities. In the 1960s, I could imagine the environment to be even worse. This was still the time when people who were suspected of mental illnesses were subjected to different types of psychosurgery, the most popular being the lobotomy. Oftentimes, these patients were not treated with care, and post-operative checkups usually revealed a whole slew of other problems. There were many misunderstandings about mental illnesses back then, so I can understand why people would feel bad for Eric and relate to him on the basis of his disorder. On the other hand, though, I understand what people mean when they say his disability shouldn't be the thing making you feel bad for him, as being disabled does not make you entirely innocent or naive. If he was truly a former reagent, then as an adult, he would understand the weight of his actions. It's not like he didn't know that he was torturing people, he very clearly understands pain. If anything, you should feel bad for him on the basis that he was forced into this position to begin with, and the same goes for the other victims too. Even if some of them are assholes to the reagents, that doesn't make them any more good or bad than the others. They all had some hand in Murkoff's plans. Regardless, they were all manipulated under the belief that Murkoff was offering them job opportunities or some other sort of help. They were taken advantage of in desperate times, and we should feel bad for all of them because of that. However, for me, it was never fully about either of these things. It was less about the fact that Eric is disabled, and rather that we know this about him at all. Eric is by far the most talkative victim in the roster. There's rarely a moment where he's silent. He's always expressing himself or telling us something about who he is. Of course, the other victims have dialogues that reveal personal details about themselves too, like the scapegoat talking about his son, the union boss mentioning his family, and Lot 7's name being Dawn. However, these details are not hyper-specific enough for us to form a solid idea of these people. So many people in the world have children and families, and anybody could be named Dawn. Eric, however, tells us a lot more. We have the most amount of personal details about him, like his name, the fact that he's from Rochester, his medical diagnoses, and his feelings about what's happening. He's constantly being vulnerable with us, sometimes even expressing mild pleasure. He gives us enough information about who he is as a person to build a specific idea of him in our heads. For me, this allowed me to connect with him a lot deeper and feel closer to him than I do the other victims. Even though what we do know isn't all that extensive, it still feels to me as if I'm killing an acquaintance or even a friend. I've consistently felt more guilty while playing this trial than I have any other. So props to Red Barrels for the amazing writing decisions, I guess. On the topic of writing decisions, I have one small gripe with the way the update was set up. It felt kind of odd for the revision therapy to be released right away in the update, especially considering how it was teased in the trailer. I was expecting more of a build-up and more suspense, rather than for it to be just dropped on us the second we load into the game. If the Prime assets were noticing the graffiti scattered around the trial environments, then it could be fun if we, as reagents, could find them too. I think the big reveal of the fake escape would have been much more compelling that way as well. For maybe a month or a couple weeks of the update, the Murkoff staff could have gone around the trials, placing fake graffiti and posing as Amelia to get reagents' hopes up again. Then, one day when we load into the game, we get a notification from the radio, and it happens to be from Amelia. She's letting reagents know that another escape is happening. This is how Murkoff would tempt reagents just to turn the tables so they can finally prove once and for all that Amelia was in fact lying the whole time. Additionally, if Silence the Idol was released before Escape the Lies, then it could have given Easterman time to gauge the reactions to the lessons being presented. If the reagents are internalizing what Silence the Idol is trying to teach them, then it could be a good sign that the revision therapy will have the intended effect. Though, to be fair, I think I am overestimating Easterman's impulse control a little. He's only worried about tarnishing Amelia's influence and as soon as he possibly can. Regardless, that didn't taint the overall experience of the trial for me. I still really enjoyed being able to go through the biohazard facility and see what the hype was all about for the first escape. The scapegoat and light bulb mechanics did seem a little random to me though. I figured generator and fuel mechanics would have been a little more appropriate for the setting, but I suppose because this is an actual trial and not us trying to start up the biohazard facility, the mechanics aren't going to make a full amount of sense. My only other critique about the mechanics is that those light bulbs are truly the bane of my existence. I hate them so damn much. Otherwise, the environment is really good, and it's super cool to see how the facility has been repurposed. For Silence the Idol, I really like the mechanics, but I feel like the sheer amount of them just kind of makes it feel like the trial is dragging on a bit. With the 3 studio setups, the battery stations, and then the cassette tapes, it starts to feel like a slogfest, especially after you finish the battery section and reach Studio 3. On their own, though, I think the mechanics are great. They're unique from anything we've seen in the past, they're quite fun, and they fit very well with the trial environment. If I had to change anything, though, I would probably cut down the battery section. I don't entirely understand why it was added in the first place, maybe as a break from setting up the TV studios, but most other trials have pretty repetitive gameplay up until the final kill anyway. I suppose Red Barrels was trying something different with how they set up their trials. I don't entirely mind it, but it also doesn't feel entirely satisfying either. Hi, random change in scenery again. As I was playing through Silence the Idol for my clips, I did some more thinking and it actually kind of helped me realize why the battery section exists. The upper floors are the only spots where the Crest twins appear. However, if these sections were to be cut down, then they would have had almost no screen time at all. A lot of people complained about this, I did too initially, but I believe Red Barrels did this for a good reason. They didn't cut down the Crest twins screen time out of pure dislike for them. If that was the case, then we would be seeing the same treatment in their other trials. This time, it actually has something to do with Eric. Throughout the trial, much like any other victim, he is heard calling out for Aurora and Otto. And other trials, the Prime assets will actually respond to the victims and interrupt your progress to save them. Eric, however, is entirely isolated. He never gets saved. I think this isolation was created on purpose. With no Prime assets to bother you while you're torturing Eric, it gives you more time to sit with him and listen to what he has to say. As I said earlier, there's more time to build a connection with him, which makes it even harder to kill him. I think Murkoff planned for this to happen. They're trying to teach you to not care about killing people whom you might have personal connections with. It's just another step of the desensitization process. Regardless, I think the critique of the battery section being the thing that makes the trial feel like a slogfest is still valid. It serves a purpose, but ultimately players are too distracted with the gameplay to pay much attention to the story implications. I think the execution could have been a little less draining. Oh, and also, one more thing I noticed. I think it's insanely sinister how we have to change the cheering cassettes to booing cassettes before the final kill because, based on what we know about Eric, he's probably been degraded and looked down on his whole life. So, even in death, he can't seem to get any grace. That being said, I still think the trial was really good. I'm not the biggest fan of the Crest twins ever, but it's really nice seeing them get more love, and I think the TV studio was perfect for them based on their lore. I'm very much hoping at least one of the new MK challenges in Season 7 will be for that map, and hopefully the twins are more present this time around. Though I don't have much to say about the MK challenges that were released this season, as they don't seem to have much of a connection to the lore I've been talking about. The only thing of note, really, is the opening dialogue for Win the Truth. I found it interesting how, yet again, there's a reference to television through the phrase screen-fed ignorance. What this dialogue means, though, I'm sort of unsure. The way I interpreted it is as Easterman telling reagents to consume falsehoods spread through the TV, and then regurgitate what they know to the public, specifically to the wise, as this knowledge will tear them down. Winning the game itself will punish those who are already defeated. What this means is a bit hard to pinpoint. If we're sticking to the theme of politics and television, then maybe the wise and the defeated refer to followers of a political campaign. The wise could be anyone who has enough confidence in their knowledge of their chosen party. So then we, as reagents, should consume enough propaganda to force the wise to doubt themselves. We win the truth by fabricating it. The defeated are the people who already know this quote-unquote truth and will suffer knowing they placed their trust in the wrong people. The game, i.e. the trial, is their way of being punished. Or something like that, probably. Easterman speaks in the most complex of ways sometimes. He gets difficult to understand. Anyway, the gameplay of this trial is really enjoyable. Even if it's simple, having to do math to figure out the combination for the code is something I quite enjoy. It reminds me a lot of the Valve's in Kill the Politician. It gets your brain working, even if only a little bit, rather than just having you go on a bunch of fetch quests. I'm also very happy this section of the fun part got a new MK, as it's one of my favorite environments ever. The other MKs, Incinerate the Relic and Solve the Murder, are also pretty good. I like Incinerate the Relic a lot more than Solve the Murder, as it's a lot easier to comprehend your first time around. I mean, you're just collecting jewels. Solve the Murder loses me as soon as I get to the murder weapon or room number. The instructions are very vague, so I sort of have no idea what I'm supposed to be looking for. That's most likely my own fault, but unfortunately it does spoil the enjoyment for me. Though I'm sure that once I figure it out, it'll easily be one of my favorite MKs. But I sort of refuse to play it, so who knows when that will be. All in all, I would say this is a pretty amazing update. There are things I wish were done differently, but in no way have they tarnished how much I love the new content. Red Barrels has not disappointed yet again, and I am very excited for what's in store for Season 7. But anyway, that pretty much sums up all my thoughts on Project Judice. If I missed anything, please feel free to let me know, and I am very much open for discussion in the comments. Alrighty, bye now.